Welcome back to UCC Architecture Society's Back to the Drawing Board lecture series. Myself, Niamh Hurley, and Nomah Sullivan from UCC Architecture Society are joined by Shane and Paul, who are part of the Ardú Cork Street Art Initiative. So as of October 2020, I'm sure everybody's noticed these little street art kind of murals popping up around Cork. So we invited some of the lads behind it just to, I suppose, kind of go through like how it all started, where their background in design is, and I suppose different avenues that people can look at post-graduation or even in between. So you can get started there, I suppose.
Cool, thanks. Thanks for having us, guys. My name's Shane. I'm one of the directors here along with Paul, who's on the other screen there as well. So we're just going to, I suppose, have a chat through Ardú and how it came about and how we realized that it all kind of happened quite quickly over a series of months. So it was great to achieve this, I suppose, everything we planned. I'm just going to try and connect this here. So. Okay, so I'm gonna just, okay, is that, yeah, that's up, isn't it?
Yeah, you can see that, Shane.
Cool, nice one. Yeah, so effectively Ardú, which is the Irish for Rise, kind of came about during the first lockdown. I think a lot of creatives are kind of struggling with trying to make work, get work seen and viewed. But not only kind of creators, I think people as well like that didn't have the access to creativity, galleries, and such kind of spaces and visual stimulation, you know. So we kind of took it upon ourselves, I suppose, you know, with our background in both kind of graffiti and street art. Paul would be more in the graffiti side, I'd be more maybe the street art, also the history in fine art printmaking and graphic design. And Peter Martin, also another Cork, Cork-based Cork local artist as well, and stained glass artist also came on board. So the three of us kind of just knocked heads, you know, and we approached the city council, you know. I said, look, we had a good idea. It was going to be kind of a rallying call, I think, to kind of create these amazing murals throughout the city and, you know, lift people's spirits in the middle of, I think we were the second lockdown at that stage. But it all came about kind of pretty quickly from initial kind of concepts, ideas, contacting artists, and also I think accessing funds. You know, it was all a massive kind of learning curve for all of us. We were very lucky when we approached City Council and got funding approved by both them and Creative Ireland. They kind of assembled a team, you know, with Roseanne Kidney, who's a project manager, and Louise Barker, PR. So there was a nice, good kind of crew put together. We gelled quite quickly, but we were very kind of lucky, I think, that because this was an artist-led project, we all had connections to the artists, you know, directly. There was no kind of mad putting out a call, you know, kind of screening everyone. We knew everyone could do it, and we knew we could do it within time. And this here is one of the murals. This is Mazer's, so his background is in graffiti. So I'm going to let Paul kind of chat a bit about that.
Hi guys, so yeah, like Shane said, my background will be more in the graffiti side of things and organising on that side. Probably for the past like 15 to 20 years roughly. So our aim really was to try and pick specific locations in the city that would have been a little bit off the beaten track, or that would have served as a function just for passers-by and things like that, and then try and use that to transform them into different kinds of spaces. That was a big part of our approach, because obviously a lot of murals, they end up in commercial areas, like the sides of commercial premises, and they're really only there to suit the, you know, the business and things like that. Whereas for us, we wanted a way of transforming the actual city for the people who use the city, and make people maybe stop in routes they never would have stopped before, or maybe just change how people spend time in that area as well. And you'd be surprised what a difference just a mural can do to how long someone is willing to spend in an area, or a route they're willing to take to work and stuff. So yeah, that's just a little bit of background on how we went about it. As well, then what we wanted to do was we wanted to focus our artist choices in and around either Cork artists or artists who have a long-standing history with Cork. A lot of the festivals that would be running in Ireland and internationally, they would focus on what you'd call like big names. So paying big money out to fly people in, people with huge Instagram followings and stuff like that. And it's kind of a bugbear in a way that's like, we don't need to do that in Ireland. We've got talent in Ireland and within Cork and people who have connections to Cork that can easily put together amazing work. We don't need to pay a lot of money to fly someone in who doesn't understand the city. So the graffiti guys that we picked would have been Macer, Aches and James Earley, and they all would have been painting in Cork probably for the past 10 to 20 years with me and with some of the other people who would have been involved in the city. So that's just to give you an idea of why and how we chose them. And then obviously Shane can talk a bit more about Shane and Peter and Dee. But for Macer in particular, he is obviously everyone would know him for his contemporary work now and his studio work and things like that. But he is traditionally a graffiti writer who would have been painting since he was a very young teenager. So like Al is painting about 20 years now, and he would have painted a lot of graffiti in Cork, and he would have come down to Cork a lot. So when we got the festival together, we wanted to give him the opportunity to be involved, and we kind of got lucky, to be honest, to do with some other cancellations to do with COVID that we ended up getting him. So he was a big win for us, and the Kino was kind of like perfect shape and size for him as well, because his focus is always on like big, blocky, bold colors and shapes. So the Kino, the way that building is it's not a gable end, it's long. So it's really necessary that it can kind of take something that doesn't have to be, say, a face or a landscape or something like that, that it can be a bit more abstract and stretched out. So his work is very mechanical. Like you can see in the piece that's kind of being shown there, there's some very like straight lines and boxes and edges. But what he started to do over COVID, because he couldn't travel and things like that, he started to try and bring nature and kind of more biological aspects into his, botanical, not biological, botanical aspects into his work, because he started doing a lot of walks and a lot of hiking and things like that, exploring the countryside, whereas previously he would have just been traveling the world painting. So this piece was a bit of a groundbreaker for him, because it was the first time he really got to paint that sort of a piece. And I think the location it's in for us was really important, because the Kino is such a cultural iconic place for Cork. For anyone who knows music or cinema or anything like that in Cork, they'd know how important the Kino is. Now, we didn't know at the time that it would be gone, so it will be demolished soon enough, unfortunately, but at least it went out with a bang, we kind of think. The other thing is where that piece is. I know what I liked about it too was it's on a really busy commuter path, and he kind of liked that it was changing that whole street. It was, there's so many people coming from UCC to the city and coming on buses and bikes and walking, and he kind of liked the fact that people would experience it so differently. You'd see it from a bus window or cycling past, or you're walking, you could stop. So there was a lot of factors that played into that mural and kind of how Al designed that mural and made it fit that particular space. Even with, you look at the black, he's tied the black into the colors of the black at the Kino so that it's not too overpowering on the space. For a piece that's so colorful and strong, it doesn't completely take over the whole space on Washington Street. It kind of sits straight, somehow it sits really nicely there, We're just going to jump on into the AX piece. I think most people probably, this is the standout piece that most people probably would have seen the most of. It was kind of all over social media and things like that. Similar to Macer, AX is his background is in graffiti as well. So they're both from Dublin, but AX is a bit younger, but he would have been painting in Cork for probably the bones of 10 years as well, coming down, same as Macer would have, off his own back, painting on our jams and painting like lettering graffiti pieces. But he started to develop his work then quite a lot into these 3D pieces. So he started out doing 3D letters, and then he started changing them to characters, and he just kind of stepped up and up and up every time. If you've seen the progression of his work, it's a bit crazy to watch how good he's gotten over the years. I think for us, this was probably our wow piece that we were most kind of taken aback with. Like we went around and we picked out walls. Peter, the other member of our team who's not actually on the call today, he traipsed Cork for like weeks just taking photos of walls nonstop. And like when we saw this gable end, it was a raw concrete gable end. We all just knew like that this was a perfect place, and we knew because of how you view that wall, like there's a big wide road and the footpath gives you a good perspective of it. You're not right up against it, so you can take in the entire size of that building. And also it's a very busy pedestrian street as well. A lot of people walk in from the Douglas side of Cork into the city there. So we kind of knew we needed something big and something impressive. So we offered this to Aches and he was all over it. Another point probably on this is that we gave the artists complete freedom. We didn't dictate to them what they needed to paint. We didn't tell them it had to be, this is what we want. We talked to them about a theme that we had, the theme of rising, and we wanted them then to take that and run with it and work that into their own piece and use that. But we didn't need them to paint exactly what we asked for. So Dave used that, and he used the hurler, and that hurler kind of represented his like two loves are graffiti and hurling, and his then was like I think it was kind of an ode to hurling when all sports was stopped during COVID, and it was his way of just, I don't know, I guess number one, showing his love to hurling, and number two, giving something to the hurling community. Like we done an awful lot of GAA pages sharing it all over Ireland and stuff like that, and I know like O'Neill's were onto him and stuff like that. But yeah, like this wall was probably, I think anyway, for me, it blew me away. I still go to look at it most days. Like you can see I think I'm just counting there, it's like four and a bit stories high. And it's all free-handed by him. So he was up in a cherry picker for the bones of 2 weeks. He used I think it was about 250 cans of paint.
The owner needs to sign it off as well. Like, so, I mean, the guys would have contacted the owners of all the buildings as well. Like, so I think that before obviously we even kind of start or engage with it, it's the owner first. We need to, I think this one kind of went down to the wire, didn't it? Really, it was literally like kind of a few days before.
This was I had to be down there one evening talking about a drain pipe.
Yeah, it really is. Like, there's a lot of skills, like, trying to talk people around like that, to say, look, come here, can we paint? Yeah, like, as Paul was saying there, nearly 4 stories of someone's building. Like, you're going to totally transform it. And the interactions it has, but I think,
yeah, like you kind of, like you were saying, like you have to be careful as well, because you can't, like we're very particular in like what kind of mural is going to go there. Because like say the background of my Zoom is like a graffiti wall. Like we don't want that there. It doesn't work there. It doesn't suit the area. It just takes over the area. Whereas I just think something that's more the public are maybe more open to, that's a bit more enjoyable for everyone and pique curiosity, a bit more not so niche, then that's kind of how we picked artists to go in certain places as well. And it's kind of how we picked artists full stop as well, Like we didn't automatically go for crowd pleasers, or we went for people who we felt were just of such a high standard it would kind of blow people away a bit.
Yeah, I think that was the intention, really, wasn't it? Kind of just to kind of come out straight kind of and just hit it hard and get a really solid lineup of artists that kind of covered many different kind of facets, not only from graffiti but to fine art, but each could tell a story differently as well. We were conscious of the fact that we had quite a number of abstract artists, but also things like this with Aches piece, it's quite literal. It's about accessibility as well. Someone might look at an abstract piece and have absolutely no time for it, and that's fine.
That's it, yeah.
Like this resonates with other people differently as well, So it's a lot of conversations you have as well, like, when we were even standing, just as he was painting this, just kind of, as I suppose spotters, for health and safety, people just stopping and chatting to us, like from all ages coming in, I mean, there was a couple one day I think came in, they're in their 70s, like they just jumped in the car because they'd seen this on the papers and drove in to see it, So when you can kind of, connect to people like that in such different age groups and demographics, I mean, that was always our plan or intention. We didn't want this to be solely a silo thing for street art people. Just needed to connect with, a city, which was kind of...
Yeah,
brief, you know?
I mean, I guess from our perspective too, right, is that like our thing all along was that we felt that a lot of street art and stuff was kind of kept away from people. Like not everyone felt they could connect with it unless it was like really, really popular street art like Banksy. And that's not a fair representation of street art. That's one thing. There's a lot of different aspects that a lot of people don't know about. And it's the same with graffiti, and they're afraid to ask and they don't feel like they can connect to it. Whereas it's like everything in the art world, like it's kept very separate from people and it's out of reach of a lot of people because they don't feel like they get it. Whereas we thought if we put these up around the city, all of a sudden, like you've got all these hidden fans of art that have never had a chance to engage with it before, and they're going to learn about it this way. And like we were shocked in one way at the people who were coming to us, but in the other way we weren't, because this is what we thought would happen all along. I mean, you know, we're always expecting that it's just kids on Instagram that are going to like street art, but it's crazy. It's ridiculous. The idea, of course, someone elderly is going to. It's just everyone makes an assumption that it's not for them. You know, I would say the reaction we got was more powerful from people outside of that, you know, Absolutely. That age group that you assume. I would think even the walks that we did.
It definitely got a stronger reaction. I suppose people who weren't as familiar, I suppose we would be quite, I suppose, familiar. I mean, this is kind of the realm that we kind of hang around with and know people in. So we're very kind of, you know, kind of just, I suppose, conscious of what's going on in the street art world. But then, you know, like that kind of, as Paul was saying, people who necessarily mightn't be or mightn't see it. It definitely kind of, you know, because the scale as well is massive. It's insane. And there's actually something the other day I noticed, Asbestos, one of the other artists who's kind of painted in Cork before as well, he made, so something he said online was literally that like street art, I think, is the only art form that's defined by where it is. You know, there's no such thing as gallery art or canvas art. You know, it's kind of strange that it becomes its own thing just because of where it's placed, you know. I mean, technically it is an art form, that is what it is. It's just where it is shouldn't really define it. And like that, a lot of artists who have painted, like, you know, Al Macer, he's got quite a strong studio output painting, as does Aches as well. Like they're all, like everyone's massively accomplished in various art forms as well. Like I'd be printmaking, you know, I'm only painting kind of a large scale the last few years as well. Same with Deirdre Breen, you know, she's graphic design, printmaking, you know, it's just that application. And I suppose like that, any artist, you know, you kind of learn as you go on, you want to learn new things and how do you advance as an artist. And certainly from what I found, you know, the kind of street art scene in Ireland is quite accessible and everyone's quite willing and open to kind of, you know, chat and teach each other, you know, and that's something I've always appreciated in my art learnings over the years, you know, having not studied kind of fine art in college, like I did printmaking as a module, like in the Crawford, you know, it was part of the graphic design course, but it wasn't certainly something I'd intended to do. But then I did like a night course, and then, you know, you just ask people questions, and that's how you kind of progress. And I think definitely there's a strong kind of unity within the street art scene in Ireland, which is great, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
And it you know, it just kind of inspires confidence in people as well, like, because you know, you can kind of, you know, people are also kind of afraid to reach out, but I think definitely with social media, people are far more accessible now as well, you know, which is great. This just piece here now I'll just chat about a bit. It's Garreth Joyce. He's a Cork local also, Dublin based, and Garreth be very much more stencil form, I suppose, for his artwork. So all of this, his piece here, which was based on the burning of Cork, I mean, it was a centenary of that last year. I think we reached the 100 years around the week he finished, wasn't it, in December?
Yeah, it was in around that time, yeah.
So it was quite fitting, and, you know, there's a nice narrative to the city, what was going on anyway. You know, I mean, there's a lot of, I suppose, talk about it in the city. The council were certainly promoting it. And this was just another format of expressing it and showcasing it to people. You know, Gar was painting this for a few days. But again, this would have all been created digitally online. Just digitally. Beforehand, and then, you know, he'd, you know, run it by us, and it's all good. Then each of those shapes have to be printed off and hand cut with a stencil. Like, there's a lot of work there before he even gets to the wall. It all needs to be, you know, stenciled, cut out, color selections, you know, and even like that, when you work on stencils, their paper, we were conscious of the fact that we were running late into the year with weather. You know, I think when Aches was painting, there was the floods and everything. And all this can play on timelines, and, you know, we've got to get approval to, you know, shut down streets, and block off footpaths, so things have to kind of run quite smoothly. And, you know, if you're working with stencils and it's raining, that's not ideal because your paper starts melting. So it's all these different variables coming to the mix. But this was a lovely piece from Gar, and again, very different to the other pieces we'd seen as well. This is Peter Martin's piece here, down the Cork Quay on Peg Toomey's gable end there. And like, Peter's been painter on Cork for years and years again as well, like that. And you'd see a lot of his work around. And this was a great piece because it, you know, it's such a traditional kind of part of the town as well. There's a lot of history there. And he kind of referenced back to Cork, and that it was someone fishing on the Lee Fields. And he had a large moon there as well, and that kind of tied in with the rise element that tied in here in the narrative was, you know, the rising of the moon and the tide levels and all that. And that was a nice kind of, you know, kind of thought process as well, like that. It's always interesting to see, you know, as Paul was saying, we left it quite open to the artists. Like, I think you find when you're given kind of free rein, you definitely have far more interest in the output. You really want to kind of give it your best, because, you know, it isn't client dictated, or not client dictated, but, you know, client funded artwork can be very much to, you know, certain guidelines or specifics or requirements, you know, that you kind of have to hit because they're paying and you've got to deliver. But with this, you know, again, because it was artist led, we knew to get the best out of everyone. And, you know, I think Peter painted this over, it was like 3 or 4 days or something like that.
Yeah, he was like, oh, 4 days in total he finished it. Like, he can, yeah, he's a freak, he's a machine when he gets going. Like, I thought Aches was good, like, but then Peter got up the cherry picker. But
yeah,
you know, I think with Peter's one as well, it kind of, like, because you can see here in the picture, like, you can see Peg Toomey's there, and anyone who's from Cork will know what Peg Toomey's is, and they'll know that street in that area and how much history there is. We were very keen as well, like, when we originally started talking to the council, and there was a planning representative, Erin, from the council, and she was amazing for us. But we were very clear with them that this, like, because it was in this area, we weren't going to paint. This is a historic image from this area, because it just doesn't really add anything to it. It just, like, doubles down on what's already there. Whereas, like, Peter's piece is not traditional at all. It sits really nicely in this little area. It's down a little alleyway off of a really important place, but it's not like, it didn't have to be a painting of something that happened in that area. And that was our big thing, is that we wanted to kind of breathe life into the place, but not like shoehorn it in and just be like, oh yeah, this is here because this happened here. You know, like, a lot of times that can happen, and it can get a bit redundant. It doesn't age that well. Whereas, like, Peter has picked a very Cork specific thing. Like, everyone who walked past that knew straight away that was the Lee Fields and that was St. Anne's in the background. So it gets that message across without having to be too, like, in your face, this is from the area, you know. And that was a big thing for us, is to kind of let it speak for itself, a little more subtle, not to be too, like, over the top, a commissioned piece for the Cold Key kind of a thing.
Yeah, it sits really nice, like, there again, kind of color selections, you know, it's quite muted in regards that it sits in like that, as kind of Paul was saying, it isn't too overbearing. And, you know, a lot of the artists, when they were kind of briefed, you know, like anyone, you have to consider the space to where you are. Like, I mean, you know, you're quite lucky to be given the chance to paint something this scale in a living kind of city that people have to pass every day and work with. So, you know, you have to be considerate, definitely. And like that kind of, as Paul was saying there again, like, people, I remember like standing there one day and people just knew the Lee Fields. A lot of people had fished there, you know, and so everyone had a story. I think he was painting, and there was some brothers came by and they'd kind of fished there recently. And a lot of time too, as well, when you spend a few days in a space like that, you really get to learn the local history and meet the locals and learn new stories. And I think Peter was saying, because, you know, it has St. Anne's there in the background, you kind of see the horizon line, kind of unknowingly, he kind of forgot that there is actually quite a big graffiti history in St. Anne's building itself as well. Like, a lot of graphic artists would paint there, and we have painted there for a long time, over years. So on the interior of that building, he showcased there's just endless walls of graffiti as well. So that's a nice kind of, you know, kind of narrative someone else kind of put on it. So that's what it is. It's kind of resonating with locals and those that kind of pass by. And that's the important part, you know, it creates the conversation, you know. This one's James Earley's one?
Yeah, this is James Earley's piece. So this is the piece that's down by the Mercy. So it is, yeah, what's the name of the street again? I'm trying to read it. It's Coach Street, isn't it?
Coach Street, yeah.
Yeah, Coach Street. So basically, this is kind of facing the Mercy. So when we were looking at all the walls, this is one. So because I would know the artists quite well, and I would have painted with them for a long time. So I was kind of probably the one who was looking at the walls for some of them, trying to think which ones they'd like. And this one I thought would suit James pretty well. The building it's on is like an old council kind of housing building. And it's this really nice kind of, I think it's sandstone or something like that. So it's this really like kind of pale colored brick. And it just was, I don't know, just perfect. It just thought it would be perfect for the type of work that James does, because his work is almost stained glass in nature, because that's where his family background, they're very famous, like Irish stained glass makers. I think it's 3 generations of them. So he's kind of gone from graffiti and stained glass, and he's kind of mixing the two of them together. It's a really fascinating way of doing it. And as well for James, he's the type of artist that would rather be in this little hidden away little part of Cork to be discovered. Like, whereas Aches would love the idea of being on this big street that people would pass. James then is more a fan of people having to kind of find him and seek it out. So he loved kind of everything about this. And the other aspect then was the hospital. So he, like when James designs his pieces, he puts in so much thought into like what's going to go there and why it's going to go there. And, you know, where like Aches may have just kind of been like, I want to paint a large hurler and that'll work here. Like James puts in so much just thought into like what will work in this area, what colors will work in this area, what themes. So he created this piece about I'm probably going to say it wrong, so I haven't said it for a few months, the circadian rhythm.
Yeah.
So he created this piece about like the circadian rhythm, which is inside of all of us, and it defines how your body responds to day and night and rest and being active and things like that. And he kind of wanted to center a piece around how COVID is messing with all of that. And this is his representation of it, of 2 different lungs. So one is on the left and one is on the right. Obviously, it's quite abstract. So that was his representation of it and how our bodies are responding to everything being kind of flipped on its head because of COVID. And the big thing for him was with the hospital there, he wanted to create a piece that's not obviously 2 lungs, but for him, that was the point behind it. It had to do with health and the body and stuff like that. And he just loved the idea of people possibly coming out of a hospital and being like, this is one of the first things they see, you know, that rather than there just being just bricks and, you know, like to him, the thought that someone's day might be improved after coming out of a hospital by seeing this was massive for him. And you know what, like people actually did say that, like that, you know, it kind of made their day a little bit better around the hospital. And I know some of the employees of the hospital had said that to him. So like at a time when it was pretty grim being in the hospital, I think this was a really nice thing to add to the area. And I think this one in particular for me really transformed that whole area, because no one really went to that part of the city to walk through. It was just houses, and it's an older population, but they loved it. The older population there really loved it. And like people walk down there now with a coffee just to see the mural, and it just brought a bit of life into the place, you know. And I think that was, like for me, that was probably the most satisfying location, is that it did alter the area, and it did mean that people just changed their paths of walking, even if it's one street over, and started to explore a bit more. Because I think when that happens, it can only really be a good thing for that area and for the residents. And like the way that piece sits there, I just think it sits perfectly. It's not too overpowering. It doesn't kill everything else around it. You know, it sits really nicely in that building, I think.
Yeah, that connection was a big thing, I think, as well. Because as we're doing like the guided tours, you know, we're conscious of placements as well, like that. You know, where each of the murals went. You know, because you know, inevitably, like we kind of knew in our head that there would be some kind of a trail developed. People would definitely wander it. I mean, that's what we do, and that's one of the outcomes of this, was people were kind of relearning their city and going to places they normally wouldn't go. I think I was going to go down that street just to go to like Pat McDonald's to get paints. That was it. Like that's the only thing that drew me down there. But it's a nice kind of thing like that, you know, the way that James does like to kind of hide these little kind of gems around that you kind of find it, and then kind of word of mouth kind of happens and people start spreading it around, and then suddenly you start walking it different, because different parts of the city, because everyone kind of has a set route every single day. You go to work, you go to college, you go home, you go shopping. There's quite a set route everyone kind of has in their days, and it was nice to kind of expand that, I suppose, in a sense where people were, at the time we were within the 5K limit again. So people were quite kind of constricted to the city centre, and not a lot else was going on. But then we had this, and again, the progress was massive. For people to see progress or process is great, because people don't know like how these are done. You know, they see them great, scale amazing, but to see how they actually are, like this is all hand drafted out by James first with like, you know, brush on a stick on the cherry picker, like, and grid it off. So there's a lot of work before you start laying the colours into it. This wall here is Deirdre Breen's, which was painted on the Wandesford Quay Creative Complex there, down on the quays there, just past the Crawford College of Art. This is a great piece. It was actually completed for Culture Night back in September, and we kind of integrated within Ardú because we just think that Deirdre's a great artist and has been doing amazing murals lately as well, and has just been knocking out of the park, you know, in regards to the technicality of the pieces she does. So definitely needed to be on the roster with us. And again, her being a local artist, we were all for it as well. But Dee also actually works in the complex there in regards to where she's a member of Cork Printmakers, which is just inside the courtyard there, as am I. And Peter Martin, actually, Peter's old studio is actually behind that wall as well there, where Dee painted. So there's a nice link there. Three of us all kind of work there as well. And I have a studio in the Backwater Artists Group there. There's also the Labbit Gallery, and where Deirdre's painting theirs on the sculpture block. So quite a massively kind of creative kind of little nugget in Cork down there. So it was good to have that kind of on the trail. So what Dee did here in regards to her concept was very much kind of rooted within the building and the architecture of the building itself. It's kind of gone through many iterations. It's been, I think, an old mill. I think it stored barley for brewing. It was an old printmakers before it eventually became a fine art printmakers today. So what Dee did is, if you look at a color palette there, there's the red and the blue. They echo the building to the left there, which would be the main building. So the red is in reference to the sandstone, which is used in the creation, the structure of that building there as well. And the blue is in reference to, if you see on the doors and the window frames, there's a blue there called Virgin Mary Blue. And actually that was kind of specified by the architect who renovated the building at the time to say that that is the color these need to be, you know, don't paint anything else. These doors and windows have to be Virgin Mary Blue. And they are complementary to the actual brickwork there. I mean, the red sandstone, the red brickwork around the window frames there as well gets far more kind of dynamic there. So there's a nice kind of complementary color schemes going on there as well. And I suppose the kind of V shape there that she's chosen that, I think is quills or something. It's an architectural term for a corner or something.
You guys should know that.
You should know that. This
your
is
department.
Back on you. I can't remember what it was, but if you just look there to the left of the image there, you see where the I suppose those supporting structural bricks there stack up one on the other. It's reference to that. But then if you look from the top right down to the bottom left, there's almost kind of a sweeping motion that kind of, I suppose, drags it and gives it movement. That's in reference to both the movement of the residents that has happened in the building over the years and decades, but also the movement of the River Lee that's directly across from the mural there as well. So it's that flow of residents of the building and also the flow of the river, which I think is just really super nice kind of rationale and concept that Dee had created. I think she's over a week painting this. Like, it's a really technical piece. Even looking at her painting it, I think the majority of the time was spent mapping it out. Like, she kind of is quite a mathematical kind of drawing as well.
Yeah, it was terrifying watching that.
Yeah, like I wouldn't have the time for that. Like, I'd just walk away.
No interest.
Dee, like, I've worked with Dee before, like in design studios, and she's quite methodical and dedicated to her work. And, you know, like she just spends so much time with this. And like, her dad was there helping her painting as well. Like, she kind of ropes everyone in. I've helped her paint, the piece outside, the ESB structure there outside the gates of UCC. I remember painting that with her there, geez, 2 or 3 years ago. And it was great fun. Like, I mean, she's just good crack, and really enjoyed that piece. And it's such an important cultural and creative part of the city as well. So it was great to have that in part of the Ardú walk. This piece here was mine. It's my own mural.
Yeah, I think, Shane, you talk about yourself. You all want to hear that.
This is one of those things where I think I didn't even kind of view it until maybe 2 weeks before I went to paint it, and then realized the scale of it. And all the way up to the lads going, "It'll be grand, it'll be fine, And it's a nice, the flat wall. But I remember cycling down to it in the morning when I was starting, and kind of counting houses as I was cycling past them on the way down, to kind of going, geez, how many houses I'm actually painting? If I was to equate it to houses on the street. But again, a really nice part of town to paint on. It's kind of almost that's Harley Street there, just beside the Metropole. And it kind of acts as a segue, I think, between north and south of the city. There's that new bridge there. Is it Mary Elms? Is that the bridge?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a really nice kind of corridor that connects north and south. So to be there for a week and meet people who are kind of on their daily commute, and those, again, who kind of just changed direction of their daily commutes, to kind of come by and just see how it was progressing and having conversations was great, and it really kind of brightened up kind of a side street. I mean, it was always kind of a side street. I just remember from being young, it was kind of a place you kind of ducked up on the car just to kind of scoot around McCurtain Street. But, recently with being pedestrianised, it's became a nice kind of walkway. There's been, touted the possibility of having a little market there and all that kind of stuff. So there's great possibilities and potential for the space. So I think when we kind of approached the city council for this, they were all for it. The Metropole owned the wall. They were like, yeah, let's go for it. And the fact it was pedestrianised as well, it was kind of good to work on, because we didn't have to shut down the street. I just kind of cordoned off a section. And I think within the rationale, I think like a lot of my work anyway, it's kind of placed in abstract shape and form. But I suppose tie-ins within the locality would be certain shapes reference, I think, architectural structures within the Metropole Hotel itself as well. There's red that kind of ties in with the red brickwork. You can see a bit of it in the image there. There's kind of a section on it. It looks a bit like a barcode. It's kind of zigzagged. That took reference from the canopy on the entrance to the hotel. So there is kind of subtle kind of connections with the hotel as well. I mean, totally abstracted. You wouldn't get it unless someone said it. But the intention is certainly there. Again, as we're saying, it's important to kind of have some dialogue with the space where you are in the city as well. It's quite important. But also a lot of people actually see kind of shapes and stories within it as well. Someone saw kind of a boat in it. There's certainly kind of aquatic colours that kind of tie it in with the river and Cork's maritime connections there as well. So it was a nice piece. It's definitely kind of one of the largest I'd kind of worked on, and it was just there's a nice flow to it, and again, I think the biggest kind of buzz I got off that was just meeting people throughout the week and having conversations, and even people getting the trains going to work as well and coming back in the evenings. Just, how are you getting on? What you get done today? And that's kind of the fun part of it as well. I think, and I think that could be, one of the draws too with doing street art is a lot of time if you're kind of based in a studio, you're kind of working solo by yourself. But when you're out in the public like this, it's a totally different way of working. You're getting constant criticism every single day. A lot of people like it. Equally, people hate it. And you just have to kind of have that conversation. It's definitely kind of can be a nice kind of wake-up call as well, where you're kind of quite in your own, kind of private place in the studio, but to be out there kind of warts and all painting in the streets is kind of fun,
I think as well, Shane, like that street, like that one, like I don't know if you guys remember that street before the mural was there. So like before it was transformed into pedestrian street, it was like pretty grim. But then when they pedestrianized it, it was obviously a lot nicer. But I don't think it was being used as much. I don't think people changed their paths that much around the city. I think they stuck to the other two bridges, but you can kind of see how just colours on a wall can, like the council did everything. They pedestrianised it, they put down nice paving, all that stuff. And I still don't think it became this big pathway that they had wanted it to be. So like, it's funny, by just adding colors to a wall, it becomes a bit like, people had this old hang up probably that it was a bit of a kind of an alleyway and maybe it wasn't safe or whatever, but by adding something there, you're all of a sudden they're kind of going, oh, okay, like maybe that is a nicer place, and you're bringing more people to it. So if there's more people there, then automatically you feel more secure. And I think it did, like that one in particular did change it. Like a lot of people were kind of hanging around that area to take it in and stuff. So I think that one was another one that really changed. Like some of them, they changed the area and the fact that like you went there to look at something. But I think that one really like changed the functionality of, like, it brought more people to use that street. But
Yeah.
then like the other thing as well, like on like function and stuff, I think what's very important, like as you mentioned it there briefly, Shane, about a market, like I think that's a very important point to kind of raise as well, is that some people think, okay, there's a mural going up there, great, we're going to put a market there, we're going to put this there, this there, this there. And it kind of shows that there's not necessarily that understanding that this mural wasn't put there to be a backdrop to your shop, or this mural wasn't put there as a, you know, so your sponsor stuff could go somewhere or whatever, anything like that. Like, and this isn't just for here, this goes for everywhere, you know, this goes for, it's like, this was meant to be the exact same way that someone puts a roof a certain way on a building. This particular mural went here for this reason, and that color or that shape or that part of the hurler has to be visible for this whole thing to work. So I think that's a very important thing from our perspective too, was, and we did say that to the council and they were really supportive of us as well, is that there has to be that level of, I guess, respect that it's a new thing that not everyone gets, but like it's a design. Like it's not, you can't just take a snippet of it and say, I want that bit, I want to cut that bit out and keep that, and then I'm going to cover the rest with something, or, you know. And I think that was one of our big things, to pick walls where they could stand by themselves, that someone couldn't just add on to them and be like, yeah, we're going to use that now as a new function. Because it's like, no, this is a piece of art. This has to stand like a sculpture by itself. It can't suddenly be your background to something, some other function, you know. And I guess that was, for me, like maybe from my background in planning and stuff, was I probably was more looking at that, about the walls like serving as a function of more than just a wall, and that like how it sat in that environment was very important, that it was selected there for a reason, and that maybe that was a part that maybe there needs to be more education on, that you can't just plonk other stuff in on top of it and say, oh, it's a pretty picture, I'm going to add. I'm sure as architects, you would probably get this all the time. People saying like, I love that design, but I'm thinking of, we should also put more windows in there to do this. And you're kind of like, okay, well, I designed it that way for a reason. So maybe like, I think, you know, maybe that's a way where architecture and say our selection of walls might see eye to eye, in that people will always say like, oh, that's cool, but I also think maybe a door would be helpful there. So can we put a door there? And you're like, I would have put a door there if a door would have worked with the design, you know. So I think maybe
it's all considered. Like everything is, it's all considered. Like
that's it. Yeah, like everything is there for a reason. Like Shane painted there for a reason. Like Shane had those circles there for a reason. I think that like maybe as design students, you guys would probably understand that, or have you know, you'd probably feel that pain a little bit more than your average person we're talking to, I guess.
Yeah, it's funny, like people kind of take ownership of it, you know, which is good. So to some degree, obviously it's public art. You know, some people try to take commercial gain from it and, you know, bring it into product placements and this and that stuff and all that kind of jazz. And it's interesting, people's perceptions of what you can use and what you can take and how you can use an artist's work as well. You know, there's a whole other conversation in that as well. You know, and it's interesting to see, I suppose, people's considerations for the artwork and how they respect it too, you know. Like that, as we're saying, it's not a backdrop to kind of glorify something else. It's its own thing and its own entity. You know, again, like all the shapes and curves and colors are placed there for certain specific sections within the wall to integrate within an area, you know. So, you know, that's kind of an interesting thing as well, you know, just from knowing people whose work has been kind of reappropriated for elsewhere like that. So, like that, yeah, it did transform the area. Like there's a lot of antisocial behavior there. I mean, even as I was painting, you know, a lot of people just sitting around drinking, going to the toilet literally on the street behind me, all that kind of stuff kind of goes on. But this definitely, you know, to go back to what Paul was saying there, even just when you start laying down the first color and bring a bit of brightness, the psychology in people's minds of that space totally alters. Because I remember the staff from Metropole, because like literally in behind the door there, where the guy is there to hide his vest, that's where all the Metropole staff park their cars. And it's a big old warehouse. And I remember one or two of them came up to me and said, we actually feel a lot safer coming out of work in the evenings, going to our cars now, because, you know, the street had been lit up. They had kind of a nice kind of, you know, lights across it now. So it really is quite a spectacle. So it kind of almost became a deterrent for antisocial behavior that way. But the staff of the hotel became a lot safer. You know, and that's with color and shape alone, you know. So it's interesting to see the psychology, actually the effects that has on people, you know. And I see that even in other murals I've done. I remember the one in Caroline Street. Even when I put the pink base down for starters, people just started even noticing the building. They walk past it every single day, but it just fallen out of their kind of psyche because, you know, it just kind of got dilapidated. But by just giving it a fresh wash of a nice bright color, they kind of reconnected with it. And that's what it is. I mean, that was the whole thing Ardú was reconnecting with the city, you know. And then I suppose, luckily, one of the things that came out of that was, and how we were able to kind of, I suppose, elevate that more so was Fáilte Ireland approached us to create an audio guided tour. You know, I think a lot of people are walking around and even just sharing them on Instagram and talking about them themselves and kind of sharing the trails. So, you know, we were lucky to get funding by Fáilte Ireland to create, I suppose, an official kind of tour. We created an audio guide, so you could go online, you could walk around to all the individual art pieces, press play, and then the artist's, you know, kind of concept would be kind of relayed to you. So it was nice to learn a bit, you know, there was something there that could officially hear about the artist's story and get the narrative as well, you know. And then we also did a series of tours over, I think it was 2 or 3 weekends in December.
Yeah, yeah, I think it was 3. I was probably saying 2, so I remember.
But it was great. It was kind of, you know, it was free tickets. They kind of went out online, and a lot of it was tied in with the hospitality sector. You know, we were kind of coming out of lockdown 2. So free tickets were given to hotel residents also as well, but also whatever was left went to public. And it was nice for us to kind of, you know, this happened so fast and it kind of went up. Normally something like this takes months to plan before we even start. I think from initial kind of interaction with council to completion was 3 months, was it 3-4 months, something? It was just hit the ground running. So it was nice to get time for us, even as a team, to work together and just take it in, because it all did happen quite fast. Everyone kind of worked, you know, the artists came down, they stayed in their own apartments, they painted, you know, grand, you saw them the day they're up the lift. But, you know, it was nice for us as a team to spend this just walking around and again, getting the feedback, you know, firsthand from the public, I think, which was great, which is really important to us to see. You know, we'd seen, you know, massive, I think, feedback on the media, both print and online, but to talk to people and to hear their firsthand experience of seeing this happening over the previous few weeks, definitely gave a lot of kind of pride to us, you know, I found.
Like, I guess as well, probably from our perspective, Shane, as we, like Shane was saying, it was probably a long-term project, right? In the sense that it was a conversation. That's all it was. Shane kind of, I think you came to me first and then Peter did separately. And it was this 2 separate conversations that were going on, and then the 3 of us. But all it was really was like a chat. But once it actually became formalized, it got moving like very, very fast. So we were kind of thrown in, and like it was all absorbing. So like my poor wife will tell you, like this was just like, it was Ardú every day, just like everything had something to do with organizing it or checking something or making sure it's working. So it was kind of nice to step back and like ask people, what do you think? Because our brains were so like full of Ardú that it's kind of hard to take a step back and actually look at it and think, okay, actually this went really well, or this could have been done differently. So it was nice then to see what other people thought. And we had, like I said, like we kids, and like, you know, I expected it to be all people, like to be, you know, generic, like 20 to 40, like people on Instagram. Well, we had barely any of those in the walking tours. It was families and people who were probably 50 plus. So we suddenly had these people who I thought maybe wouldn't be as keen giving us this feedback. And it was really, yeah, it made it worth it, I think, really, like, because it was a good eye opener for us, I think, definitely to be able to ask people straight up, like, what did they think, or what did they like, or what did you know, like, what did they think James's piece was about? Because if you look at that, what I tell you that piece is about, I'm pretty sure you look at that, or you're not going to get that without me explaining the theme behind it. So it was nice to hear people say what they thought it was about. Are people saying, oh, like, I think it's, some people were pretty adamant that it had other themes. So it was nice to, like, it was nice to see how people took them in, because again, that's the point of it. Like, the artists don't really mind. If you walk past and you think James's piece is about trees, it's not, James doesn't mind that. You know, it's, the whole thing is about how you, I can same with Shane, like Shane said himself, like he's happy for people to interpret his pieces as they want. And a lot of people, I think a lot of people struggle with that when you paint street art or graffiti and stuff, that they kind of think like, well, what's the point? And you're like, it doesn't have to. I don't, like, I'm putting it there for you to do whatever you want with it. You can dislike it and ignore it and walk past it. You can love it and tell everyone about it. It doesn't really, at the end of the day, it's better that everyone likes it, but you can take your own meaning from it. You can, and it's better if that happens. And I think the point I had made a while back about Peter's like piece and it not being like literally just a picture representing that area, like, I just don't see the value in having that. I think so, having something that's a bit more out there allows people to kind of have their own meaning, and they kind of build their own emotional attachment to it then, because that's their meaning, and the next person might have a different one, and that's their take on that design. You know, I think that's one of the strengths that we wanted in the artists that we picked as well, you know, because I think Cork is, like, I've been painting in Cork for a long time, and Cork's the type of city where you could get it very wrong as well, and you could overwhelm the city, and you could stick murals in certain places and it just doesn't work, you know. And I think Cork has so much to offer just walking around and looking up at the buildings anyway. And you don't necessarily need to like submerge the city in modern murals of 3D hurlers everywhere. Like, I mean, that's it. There won't be another Aches mural going up, or like, we don't want 10 more murals this year. Everyone was like, oh, how are you going to go bigger? And we were like, well, we're not. We're going to go smaller, because, you know, there's a finite number that we want to put in the city, and that's it, you know.
Yeah, that's kind of, I think, yeah, that's kind of, it all kind of encapsulated there, you know, as we said.
My ramblings.
Yeah, like that was it. Like, we were conscious from the start as well, but we don't want to kind of plaster the whole city in murals, you know. It's definitely less is more attitude is what our view is kind of going forward, you know. Like, this year, we're kind of currently trying to get funding for this year to go ahead as well, but we don't have set certain numbers to kind of hit, you know. This is certainly kind of a side project for all of us. It isn't our main bread and butter. So it's a great passion project for all of us, you know. And, you know, as Paul was saying there a while ago, this really consumed us, like, for the few months that it was on. You know, I mean, we were behind in regards to, you know, directing, you know, two of us were painting, you know, kind of doing security guarding, moving fences. Like, it was all in, it really was. You know, and I think, and like that kind of going forward, you know, we were so lucky to kind of get a good hit and response the first year. That we want to get it right again the next time and be kind of selective and, you know, curate the next few walls correctly, you know. And, you know, Cork isn't a massive city, and we don't want to have a big mural on every single corner, because it'll just lose the impact. So that's kind of our plan, is just approach it with a, you know, with a you know, greater appreciation of what it is that we do, but to do it definitely with a less is more sense, and you know, maybe work with different people. We'll see, you know. I mean, definitely doing the tours was a great eye opener for us as well. Like, as Paul was saying there, meeting people who we didn't really know would get what we were doing or resonate with, but they were the people, you know, and that just goes to show the kind of effect that what we did had in the city, to kind of meet people who were outside the remit that we thought they would hit, you know. And that just kind of shows the power of public art and the accessibility. And yeah, we were just kind of glad to have competed and done it. And yeah, so thank you.
We're glad it's over.
Yes, it was good to have a break after it, but, you know.
Thank you for that. Sorry, I was gonna say thank you for the lecture. Or was it even a lecture? It's more of a discussion, really. Which I thought it was very interesting, I suppose, because you forget how much art and architecture overlap, but they're so segregated in their, I suppose, education. And it almost feels like such a pity. Like, we could almost nearly enact a whole Bauhaus thing where we share our first year of art and architecture and stem who wants to go where from there, because a lot of the issues you even bring up, I suppose I'm in my final year, so a lot of the projects isn't set on like doing a particular building. It's identifying, it's like I'm based at the Docklands, so I have to identify a site there and figure out issues and like what would work for the community as a whole there. So a lot of the conversations you bring up are just ones I've had in over the last couple of months, even with our team. So I think that's quite interesting in itself.
You definitely gonna have to consider it like that. I mean, even as you're saying, they're going back to the Bauhaus, you know, there was that kind of a whole, I suppose, whole school of art and design, and they all do work. I mean, you know, it's all structurally, like when you're building an artwork or working out, it has to structurally be sound in an aesthetic, in a visual sense like that, you know. And again, like that, like with putting a building in a certain place, you know, you're always going to get people who are against it and those who are for. But again, it's being sympathetic to the area. And will it work? You know, it has to have a dialogue with the area it's within as well. You know, I've worked with architects as well. You know, I've done like print work and murals, and when they come around, you have to, you know, you've got to integrate with the structure of the building itself, work within the shapes, the lines, colors, textures. So it all needs to kind of work cohesively, you know, and that's it as well with design. You know, there's so many similarities in all the kind of art forms and design processes. You know, it's a shame that they are, you know, kind of siloed off. You know, would it be a case of there being kind of a core year where, you know, you learn different kind of faculties and facility, you know, like kind of, I've always kind of been into architecture and really do appreciate it as well. Like, you know, even just mentioning there, the open house, going on those tours, and, you know, it's all creative thought at the end of the day, you know. It doesn't necessarily mean that anyone's better or lesser than anyone else. It's just the way you choose to kind of express yourself creatively, you know. So, you know, that's kind of the fun of it as well, to see, you know, even with the artists of Ardú, you could give each one a brief, but they could each be in a different location, and the art form would, you know, if you choose one artist, you know, each artist basically their rationale and concept is going to be different from each and every place you put them in the city, because it's going to react to the space they are, you know. And that's similar in architecture too.
Yeah, and I guess like from our perspective, I think maybe people wouldn't have known that so much thought has to go into who's going to go where and why they're going to go where, because it's not like we were offered some really good walls, but then we had to explain to people why that won't work, because it's the wrong place for that person. And it's the, like, after Ardú, so many people contacted us saying, I want a mural. And it was generally people with businesses. They're like, I want a mural. I need a mural here in front of my building. I want a giant skull. And you're like, you don't. Like, you say you do. And it's the same with graffiti. People are like, I've had people contact me, I'm building a new house, I want this. I'm like, you don't. Like, it's not going to age well. It's not going to look good. Like, you know, I was kind of like, a lot of the times, like, these aren't going to help what you want. Like, these have to be in the right place. And I think maybe that was probably something, if we could kind of get people to take that away, that it's not like you just plonk one at every street and all of a sudden Cork is amazing. And if we plonk one at every street, there's no big deal about murals. There's like that hurler doesn't really seem that impressive anymore. It's, you know, we want one dotted around every now and then. And then it kind of has to be in that area where it works. Like, we can stick that hurler on the side of a certain old building, and all of a sudden if we put that down by where the Mercy was, I just don't think it works.
No.
It just doesn't work in that area. It's an older area, that area, the type of architecture that's down there, the type of materials they use that's down there. But we can stick it where it is, no problem. It's facing like a brand new red brick building on one side and just some shops and cafes on the other side. So you're not interfering with someone, you know, who's lived there in an old house for 20 years. So I think that's kind of maybe one side of it that people maybe don't fully understand, is that there is an awful lot that goes into placement. And like Shane said, that comes from a design background for him. But even for me, from graffiti, like, a lot of people hate graffiti, and a lot of people love it, and that's fine. But they probably wouldn't understand the amount of thought that goes into someone's mind about where they're going to apply that, even that tiny little piece of graffiti, like where that's going to be applied. The thought process behind that is so much more than just that goes there. And it's kind of, I think maybe that's something that like might resonate with you guys maybe a bit more than the general public, you know, because I think, like you said yourself, it's a battle that you probably have to have and will, if you do end up doing this as a choice later on, will have to have for a while, you know.
So we do have 10 minutes. We could continue on the discussion, or we can just leave it at the 10 minutes. Because you probably did cover a lot. Nomah, do you have any questions? Because I feel like you're very interested in this.
Yeah, it's actually, like, I have to say, like, those art, like, pieces of art are incredible. Like, I've actually done a couple of photo shoots around them, and like they'd be a defining factor of, like, you know, what clothes the model's going to be wearing and all this kind of stuff. But I was just wondering, like, what's the, like, legality behind putting up those pieces, like, you know, on like a private house or a, you know, public space? Like, it sounds like a nightmare.
No, it's just the council. We just got the council engaged, and there was no issues with planning permission because they're not advertising. And also the other thing is that if you have the permission of the residents, and you, like Shane already said, you have to engage. So like you have to engage with everyone. You have to make sure everyone's going to be comfortable with it. And then, like, very clearly, this can't, the piece can't be possibly offensive. The piece can't be overtly political. It definitely can't be advertising. So I would say, like, legally, no, because Cork, the way that the city council, and like I said, Aaron, who was our contact at the planning department, is very forward thinking, and it's not an issue in Cork. But if we stuck 20 of them up as part of Ardú, I think it could become an issue, because I think then it could become a problem. And also, if every business in Cork pays me, Shane, and Peter to paint a mural, and next year there's 20 more, then the council are going to have to start saying, like, right, everyone can't have a gable end advertisement for their business, you know. But I would say, like, legally, no, there's no, yeah.
No, yeah, sorry, it just becomes kind of, it kind of just becomes visual noise, really, you know, if there's too much. And I suppose that's kind of, I suppose, in our interest to kind of like that, to do it right. I mean, like as Paul was saying, once this finished, a lot of people contacted us for their business to put this up, and we had to kind of say, no, like, it's not going to work. You know, I've turned down, you know, a good few pieces as well, because you just know it doesn't fit, and they're asking for it for the wrong reasons. They kind of want it because they want to draw people to their business, and that's not what we want to do. It wasn't kind of for commercial gain really with us. It was more appreciation of the art form, and the narrative behind it all, like that. And, you know, people have asked me to paint, you know, their walls in offices, and I've said no, because I wouldn't want to sit in an office with something as bold and graphic every single day, because it's just it's flash, you know. And it's again, it goes down to the consideration of placement, you know, and where it's going to be, because it's like that. It's like almost too much of a good thing as well. You know, it definitely loses its sheen if on every single corner you have something, another mural. You know, it kind of loses that kind of wow factor, in a sense where, you know, you might have gone down a certain street in a few weeks or months, and then you kind of, you know, you, like that, you might go into the Mercy, you say, and you come past James, and you go, oh, geez, yeah, you know, I haven't seen that in a while. And it kind of hits you, you know. And again, like that with James, is the placement there. It's a nice, subtle artwork, you know, and really well considered and structured, but it isn't brash. It just sits nicely. And I got past actually today, I was getting paint there last week, and I just had to kind of just do a quick rundown just for a quick look at it again, because, you know, it's always great to kind of stand by them, just see, you know, the scale with them. And again, having worked with the artists over that time and seeing them work on it, you know, it really does kind of, you know, kind of resonate again when you see them like that. But it's I think with planning, the fact that it was a city council project, you know, we were lucky in that regard. We didn't have to put in any mad kind of applications, you know, so that was kind of good. You know, we didn't have to kind of want to buy anyone again other than the owners.
And like with the owners as well, right? A lot of people probably think this, what happens if this mural goes or the building goes? Like, they're not tied in. They haven't agreed that this has to stay for good. Like, the Kino is getting demolished. Like, people might say it shouldn't because there's a mural on it. It wouldn't be my belief. My belief is that it's like street art is temporary by nature as well, you know. I mean, I would imagine if the owner of the building decided to paint over the hurler this summer, there would be uproar and he'd probably stop. But like, no one's going to say to him, you can't do that. Ultimately, it's his building. I would hope he wouldn't, but, you know, I think that's the other point, is that, like, the whole point is that we don't want this to be forced on people either at the end of the day. And I do think there's an element of, like there's like art, street art and graffiti and all those things, there's an element of temporary to them too that kind of makes this part of the beauty of them, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that is like I'm not overtly kind of precious of mine. I mean, for me, the kick is in the process, the making, and chatting to people while it's done, you know. And obviously it's great to see it resonating with people, and feedback's great too. But I got to finish mine in a day or two, and someone grabbed a skateboard and just dragged it all along the wall and scratched all the art or all the paint, and that's grand, you know. That's fine. I mean, I suppose I'm lucky in the sense where mine is quite bold and blocky in color, so I went and just fixed it up, you know. And I did again recently with a bit of graffiti, but I suppose there's a duty on us too as well to kind of there's a bit of upkeep on it too. But I mean, again, like that, it's the nature of it. It is temporary. I painted stuff, and the next day it's all gone. It's tagged over or painted over, and that's grand, you know. I mean, I've had my you know, fun with it, creating it, and I'm not going to stand in front of it and prevent people from, you know, throwing paint on it and scratching it or reacting with it. That's just, you know, as Bob was saying, it's temporary, you know. It's not, you know, it's great to be given the opportunity to paint something at that scale, but I'm not going to be standing with a stick beside it trying to protect it.
Yeah, I think, yeah, what Noah was saying, like, it is like a big thing. Obviously, you're always concerned about whether it would be accepted in the city, and I think Cork City Council is definitely opening, I suppose, their eyes up to things that can kind of really invigorate the city, even like they're bringing parklets and things like that. So yeah. I think it's a great initiative to have and to celebrate, especially as students of Cork. It's great for us to even see. So we might just wrap up the recording here, but we'll definitely link all your social medias down below if people haven't found them yet. But it was great to talk to you, and thank you so much, Shane and Paul. And we'd also like to thank Peter as well, because he was sending
Peter's
on emails to me.
Peter's the real worker of the group.
Yeah.
it was a bit of a pity that we couldn't get him to join, because I've been conversing with him about setting this up for a while, yes. But it's still nice to even. Yeah,
I don't even log into that email box.
Yeah. It's great to be able to chat to you. So
thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for the interest.